How's it going, everybody? When I posted these cabin videos, the most common questions seemed to be, how much did it cost? I always wanted to answer that question honestly. It cost X amount, but the only reason it cost that is because I saved a lot of money by buying used and surplus materials, doing things a little differently and thinking outside of the box. I don't want people to get the idea that this will be a cheap project if you just go and buy everything brand new from the store. So my first tip is buy used windows and doors. Windows can be a huge expense in your cabin build. The more you install, the bigger the expense. But if you buy used windows, you might be able to get all your windows for the cost of just a few new ones. This cabin has a 5-foot by 4-foot window, 4-foot by 4-foot windows, and then the 2 doors we used for windows, and I only spent $250 for all of them. Had I bought them all new, it probably would have been somewhere between $1,300 and $1,800. When I buy used windows, the things I look for are they have to have double pane glass. If you can see a hazy film between the panes, the seal is probably leaking and it's just going to get worse. The other things I look for is the nail flange. Sometimes this can get damaged when people remove the window. Little damage doesn't bother me, but if it has large pieces missing, I won't buy it. Same thing goes for doors. You can save a lot on doors, sometimes get them free. We got this one free from a friend. He had changed his door out, was going to throw it away. And this second-hand door only cost $30. My last tip on using second-hand windows and doors is an important one. If you plan to go this route, make sure you have all your windows and doors before you start building so you can frame the openings the right size for the windows that you're getting. This cabin was framed 16 on center, and that brings me to my next tip. Frame your walls 2 foot on center. This isn't a huge upfront savings, but it saves in 3 ways. It'll save you on materials, it'll save you on time, and it saves on heating and cooling in the long run. Let's say you're going to build a 20 by 20 cabin. If you frame your walls 2 foot on center instead of 16, you will need 5 less studs per wall. That's 20 less for all 4 walls. That's not a huge savings on lumber, about $50 for 2x4s and $95 if you went with 2x6s, but it also saves time. If you bought 8-foot 2x4s instead of pre-cuts, you'll probably have to cut them to length. That's 20 less measurements, 20 less cuts, 20 less layout marks, and 80 to 120 less nails that you have to drive, which is quite a savings in time. You can see how much more open this wall is by going 2 foot on center as opposed to 16, which brings me to my last point. Third way it saves you is insulation. Now, the price probably isn't going to be much better, but the value will be a lot better. Wood only has an R value of 1 R per inch. So a 2x4 is an R 3.5, and a 2x6 is an R 5.5. Basically, every stud is a thermal bridge to the outside temperature. So on your 20 by 20 cabin, framing 2 foot on center has eliminated 20 studs, a total of 30 inches of wall that would only be R 3.5 to R 5.5. That will definitely help keep your cabin warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. Another thing I think saves money and time is keeping it simple. Now, I know things like dormers are cool. They look nice. I really do like them. They can add some space to a loft or brighten up a room. But if you're not experienced at building them, they can eat up a lot of time. And the mistakes that might be made, that could cost you a bit in materials. In my opinion, one straight roof line, be it a peaked roof or a shed roof like this where it's a single slope, is always going to be cheaper, quicker, and easier to build than anything that's going to have dormers or multiple roof lines. Anywhere there's a valley is going to be an extra chance for a leak. Anywhere a roof butts into a wall is going to be an extra chance for your roof to leak. So if you don't do that properly, you're probably going to have more chances of having problems. My next tip is find a discount building supply. These places are normally a little more low-key. They're not going to be a big box store in a big city. Most of the time, it's just someone who's developed a connection with a distributor and is selling good materials that may not be good enough for the big stores. Perfect for building cabins. This one's actually a shed building company that belongs to a friend of mine. He sells plywood, 2x4s, 2x6s, windows, doors, treated lumber, and styrofoam insulation. Around here, another great resource is the Amish. They sell peanut butter cookies, no-bakes, fresh squeezed lemonade. Oh yeah, we're talking about building products. They sell tongue and groove pine and cedar. They sell hardwood flooring, poly decking, treated lumber, foam board insulation. Other Amish have even built shops where they form roof and pole barn steel, slightly cheaper than a box store and much faster for special orders. Another saving tip is to make your own trim. Manufactured trim is really expensive. It's part of the build that adds up fast, and for that reason I always make my own. In this cabin, I made some of the trim from leftover siding boards, and the rest was made from tongue and groove pine. If you happen to own a router, you can make it just as fancy as you want. If you don't, square looks great too. In this cabin, all of the trim was made from leftover oak boards that I used for the flooring. The trim in this camper was made by 1x2 and 1x3 furring strips. This is probably the cheapest option. You will want to sand them a bit, and you'll want to make sure that you sort through them at the lumber yard. They're not the greatest quality, but after they're sanded, they look pretty good. Put some stain on them, they look even better. Right now, a 1x2 furring strip costs $1.50, and a 1x3 furring strip is $2.21. You really can't beat that price anywhere. Another way that I saved was I bought a used wood stove. I know this won't apply to everyone because not everyone wants a wood stove, but if you do, you might want to consider buying a used one. Unless you're going to use a tent stove, which can be pretty cheap, you probably won't find a new stove under $350. And that stove is likely to be a tiny stove that you would need to feed constantly due to its low capacity. This stove in my workshop, I paid $80 for. It was in pretty decent shape and it just needed a little paint. The stove in this cabin was $100. I actually have a video on the entire restoration process of that stove on my channel. This other stove, I probably overpaid a bit for, but it was exactly what I wanted and the guy wouldn't budge. Still saved a bit, but I've seen the same stove on Marketplace for $150 since then. One stove I would be a bit leery of buying used is a stove with a catalytic converter, and the only reason for that is the converter may be partially plugged, and that could cost $100 or more to replace. But if you find the stove you want and it's a good enough deal, it might be worth it. My last tip is to go with solar instead of hooking up to the grid. This is probably geared a little more towards people that plan to use their cabin as a getaway. But before you make any decisions on this, if there's available electric, call them and ask if they have a monthly connection fee. Our electric company at home has a monthly service fee, and of course Uncle Sam has to tack on a tax for a total of about $53 a month just to be hooked up. So even if you flip off your main breaker and leave for a month, you will still pay $53 that month. So let's say you own it 10 years. That's over $6,000 in connection fees. That's a lot of money to spend when you're only going there every weekend, every other weekend, or maybe even once a month. A solar battery bank setup doesn't have to be a huge investment. You can decrease the amount of power you will need by using a propane stove, maybe buy a surplus propane camper fridge, a propane on-demand hot water heater, 12-volt LED lights, have a generator to help charge at night if you've been using a lot of electricity during the day. If this is something you're considering, I would say get a book on solar and figure out what you need before you start buying. But there's a lot of people selling surplus and used panels on Marketplace that are in great shape and work just fine. So if you plan ahead, do some research, shop around, and think outside the box, going solar can be affordable, and that to me feels like a little extra freedom. I guess these tips are a bit similar, but that's what worked for me, and really the point of this video is to broaden your point of view. Affordability isn't found in the box store, it's just hidden slightly out of view. If you take a step back and look around, you can save when building your cabin. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.